we just go for it? Pronunciations are just going to be so bad. I'm doing it. Set the focus. My name is Josh White, and this video is a lot different from anything I've ever done. Drive My Car is on HBO Max, so once you're done here, go give it a watch. Let's get to it. Hero cars don't get enough credit. My channel goes through great lengths to not only expose more people to just how creative filmmakers can get when pairing cars with characters, but also to expose filmmakers when they poorly match vehicles to their drivers. But what happens to the audience when filmmakers purposefully give the car the leading role? No, not like that. How do you explore the character of the car? How does it interact with its fellow actors? How does it communicate? How does it influence the story? Sometimes in an omniscient way. These questions might appear silly, questions that don't warrant an answer. I'm going to answer them anyway. The movie in question is based on a collection of short stories from Haruki Murakami's published works entitled Men Without Women. The title and main through line obviously comes from the first short story in the collection, Drive My Car, but there are other influences concerning character backstory coming from Kino and Scheherazade. In the written work, the main character, Kafuku, is an actor who had a car accident while driving under the influence. A police-enforced medical exam determined there was glaucoma, presumably in his right eye, though the text only says right side. This concept of having a blind spot would come up later in both the written and visual story. With his license revoked, he needed to hire a driver while the yellow Saab 900 underwent bodywork as well as extensive mechanical tune-ups to ensure its longevity. Of added worth to the context as we'll shift into the movie's adaptation, the short story's vehicle of choice was a convertible top. Kafuku hires Misaki through the recommendation of his mechanic, Oba, who is never seen on screen. Misaki is a young woman with a stoic and isolated nature, but her driving hits the sweet spot of Kafuku's unscientific assessment of women drivers. She's not too careful and not too aggressive. There will be more details we pull from the text as we continue the discussion, like how in the story the mechanic says, "Swedish cars of this age are built to last. You need to keep your eyes on the electrical system, but they're fundamentally sound." This offhand remark is repeated by Misaki in the movie. But the last few minutes of summary make up the base level required to understand the adaptation on a surface level. Ryusuke Hamaguchi, the director of the 3-hour feature film adaptation, replaces Murakami's yellow convertible with a red paint job on the Saab 900 Turbo. While the standard hardtops existed, the Kafuku on screen, now an actor-director, enjoys a moonroof on the top of his Joyride. These changes were necessary from an aesthetic and technical storytelling perspective. While yellow was the color Kafuku's wife chose in the text, Hamaguchi chose red in order to stand apart from the warm grays of Hiroshima and the greens of the Japanese landscape. This decision was in collaboration with the cinematographer Hidetoshi Shinomiya, as yellow cars are harder to color grade against the green and warmth of the environments the Saab existed in. Purists may take issue, and that's okay. Even Hamaguchi had brought out both a yellow and red car to perform camera tests on. But yellow doesn't hold a candle to red in a cinematic sense. Replacing the detail of the text car being a convertible was an easier decision. Since so many conversations take place in the cab of the vehicle, Hamaguchi would have an easier time processing optimal audio if wind wasn't bouncing along the fabric of a convertible top. The director would even go so far as to ride in the trunk with the sound recorder for several minutes, drawing notes over every beat in pages of dialogue before coming out with a smile, delivering direction, and climbing back in for another take. Men Without Women was released in the 2014, before being translated into English in 2017. In the short story, Kafuku has purchased this car new, and had owned it for 12 years by the time the main events take place. However, there is no 2002 Saab 900, having been rebadged as the 93, and so the story is not able to specify a year. And while the package option also would have existed for this in the story, the turbo package is new as well, but these details, the identification of the 1987 Saab 900 Turbo, come from picture car availability. Movie production worked with a staple rental studio in Japanese filmmaking in order to provide the red Saab we see on screen. You might recognize the work of the Wandervogel company in The Fast and the Furious, Tokyo Drift, and The Wolverine, which was released in Japan as Wolverine Samurai. Not many details are provided in their vehicle listing, but a careful watch of the film tells us a little about the engine. Nearly every Saab 900 existed with a 2.0-liter slanted inline 4-cylinder engine, with the first generation having 4 main accessory options. Once you take into account the turbo package, it's really just 2 accessory options. Not many automakers did slanted engines, but they weren't new. I made a video not too long ago about Chrysler's Slant 6, which found its way into a 1968 Dodge D200 for Man of Steel. The initial base model had an 8-valve system, meaning 1 intake and 1 exhaust valve per engine cylinder. Through some enhancements on the badging we see in the movie, our hero cars propelled through added power provided by the 16-valve system. Those would obviously also replace the single overhead camshaft with a double overhead camshaft in the 16-valve engine. Topping out around 175 horsepower at 5,500 RPM with 201 pound-feet of torque, this setup would get you a 0 to 60 mile per hour time in the mid 8-second range. Comparable to large SUVs today, this was a zippy little hatchback in the 80s. I have a not really similar, but actually kind of similar setup in my own foreign red front-wheel drive hatchback with a moonroof and a dual overhead camshaft 4-valve system in my 95 Ford Probe GT. And it was also a pretty nice little car in its day. And if you were to go check out my build videos for that car, I mean, I was using Movie Maker and PowerPoint at that time, so cut me some slack. But oftentimes, these performance numbers don't mean a thing in the movie making business. Cars are often filmed on trailers and are never under their own power. But in a movie where driving the car is in the title, Hamaguchi found it important to have the vehicle do its own stunts. While there were rare trailer pulls, the majority, including the car crash, was all shot with Saab under live self-propelled power. In preparation for this movie, Hidetoshi Nishijima, our lead actor, would spend days in rehearsal watching scenes that didn't involve his character. Hamaguchi wanted Nishijima to experience the role of director, and so we have a replica of how Hamaguchi would coordinate rehearsals. In partnership to her role, Tokomura underwent extensive schooling with manual driving to get her comfortable operating the Saab in a way worthy of the story's description. It's made more noteworthy as, under Hamaguchi's own assessment, he has driven only a handful of times in his life. I've gone through careful consideration of movement direction in previous videos, but this one has some of the easiest to understand axis directions in any movie. When we see the car driving to the right, it typically means Kafuku is going to work, and when he's driving to the left, he's returning home. It's not always the case, there are a couple exceptions, but in the extended prologue, this structure is kept without fail. Where this differs is when we add a second and third character in the cab of the vehicle. When they talk, the camera has to set up so that the character on the passenger side is facing the left and the character on the driver's side is facing the right. These choices were purposeful too. Hamaguchi wanted to convey this subconscious sense that, though they were traveling, these lines of dialogue wouldn't be taking them anywhere, until the dialogue breaks, and an exterior shot would signal either character progression or halting. But sometimes, and this is when I most appreciate movies, the conversations they have in a car don't cut to a directive signal. Instead, we get this beautiful shot of Misaki and Kafuku holding their cigarettes out of the moonroof, which again ping-pongs between driving into the camera and driving away from the camera. No significant progress was made, and that's okay. In the short story, Kafuku only allows Misaki to smoke in the car after breaching a wall in their understanding of each other. So while it may seem like no forward progress to the film viewer, this beautiful scene is made all the more with Murikama's context. On screen, very different from the short story, Kafuku rarely connects with the external when in the interior of the car. Opening the moonroof and sharing a connection to the outside world with Misaki is only repeated one other time, when he rolls down the window to speak with his wife. So too are these arrivals and departures rare. He drops off Oto, Misaki's trial run begins, they stop at the location of Misaki's childhood home. Most of the time with the car is spent undergoing the proverbial journey. There are layers to this as well. Hamaguchi mixes in notes of every story in the collected works of Men Without Women. The character of Oto, Kafuku's wife, is enriched by the story of Scheherazade, concerning a woman who tells stories in the heat of intimacy. The story of Kino gave Hamaguchi some clues as to how he could depict Kafuku's future. Though he leaves that explanation open-ended, Kino opens a bar after finding his wife in the throes of an affair when coming back from a work trip too early. So he could presumably just take the elements of returning early as well as the many bar conversations with Takatsuki. But of course, Drive My Car is the baseline for the movie's events. In capturing a story of conversations between two characters in a car, Hamaguchi collected a wealth of influences which, when understood, even on a cursory level, provide deeper meaning to an otherwise journey to nowhere. Of initial importance is how Hamaguchi and Shinomiya chose to shoot the interior car scenes. Rarely do we have the typical camera mounted to the hood, filming through the windshield. Instead, Hamaguchi took direct inspiration from Iranian filmmaker Abbas Kiarostami. Not novel by any means when we have current directors like Edgar Wright modernizing his original techniques in flashier chase scenes, but in comparison to his international peers, Kiarostami was an early and extensive adopter of using the car as a backdrop to many of his dialogue scenes. and so over time he's become the godfather of dressing and directing interior vehicle scenes. With a library of practices, Hamaguchi pulled techniques to bring the audience into the passenger seats of these sometimes intimate moments of blindsiding dialogue or extended pause. Having Kafuku sit in the backseat opposed to the passenger, which he sits in only rarely while Misaki is driving, also provides an invitation for the audience to place themselves in any open seat and experience the journey of Kafuku and Misaki. Of late, I've been reading the Stormlight archives, and without getting too into the weeds, there is the concept of ideals that exalted beings must share. And one of them is the phrase journey before destination. In no other car-centric movies have I ever seen this thoroughly embraced than in Drive My Car. In a movie where we are constantly moving, we never really have a sense of reaching a destination. We're not trying to bring Kafuku to the theater in Hiroshima. Likewise, we have no urgency to deliver him to Gong Yun-soo's home. What we, sitting comfortably in our bucket seats, care about is watching the story unfold on the road before us. We're not waiting for peace. Kafuku seems to have his emotions under control. We're not waiting for relief. Misaki seems equally content in her role as chauffeur. Instead, we feel a build, an elevation of we don't quite know what. Only when the car finally stops, this time on purpose, both the driver and passenger selecting this destination, only then do we get the flood of emotions that have been building inside of Misaki and Kafuku. People who have spent years learning how to hide their emotions, Kafuku only letting them release once the curtain lifts, both of these individuals finally find respite and solace in the blanket silence of the snowy mountainside. I want to come back to the snowy mountainside, but I want to talk further on waiting and yearning, concepts that Kafuku explores deeply in both Waiting for Godot and Uncle Vanya. Through the cassette tapes played in the hour to and from the theater, Misaki is also able to internalize these stories of yearning. We see her story adopting the character of Sonya's in Uncle Vanya. In these plays, performers spend their entire routine yearning for any known concept of celestial aid, for relief, for great spirits, for God. Some of these are more literal in interpretation. In Waiting for Godot, which is the initial play before opening credits begin, these gods never come. Leading up to Oto's death, Kafuku never gets the chance to understand the infidelity of his beloved wife. The curtain drops, the relief never comes. Now in Hiroshima, directing Uncle Vanya, he shuns the lead role, shunning the relief that will inevitably come through playing the titular role. His reason seemingly duplicitous as the role lands at the feet of the man who, in the end, became his wife's final lover. In A Turn of Fate, Takatsuki is imprisoned and the role must fall to Kafuku lest the play get cancelled so close to opening night. Taking 2 days to set his mind right, he requests that Misaki take him to her childhood home. The journey reveals that, in their harrowed perspective, they were the cause of their family's death. Kafuku could have returned home sooner and saved Oto. Misaki could have run for help before the final collapse of her home. And now the destination, a snow-covered mountainside, an outpouring of relief, releasing the burdens of blame, finally finding forgiveness. Though your sins be as scarlet, they shall be as white as snow. The Christian symbology is often lost when we look at East Asian culture. Often we may try to provide space for their cultures and their beliefs to exist without pressuring them with our crusading belief structures. But in a story that invites the concept of God, of ecclesiastical help, we can't shy away from this scene. Taken literally, they did not find God on the mountaintop, but they found the ability to release their self-inflicted burdens. This is how you create an adaptation. In collecting Drive My Car, Kino, Scheherazade, Waiting for Godot, and Uncle Vanya, Hamaguchi has crafted an intricately laced narrative of grief, suffering, and healing. In combining a multilingual performance, a Swedish car in a Japanese city filmed under the influence of an Iranian filmmaker, Hamaguchi has rendered a culturally rich story that provides so much more meat to the simplicity of Murakami's 40-page work. Many can rightfully claim he adapted the initial short in the collected works, but great literary adaptations are not word-for-word, scene-for-scene recreations. Great literary adaptations are novel extensions to the discourse of the story. In adapting multiple plays whose endings result in either the positive or negative result of waiting on a great spirit, Hamaguchi calls to mind the tales of old in which performers and chorus members would finally be redeemed through a god descending from a machine. In these Deus Ex Machina cases, we never see the machine or God. We never see the need for saving until the final confrontation. But in this movie, the machine is always there, and the need for saving is ever present. And while it may not be in the most literal sense, the stage may have represented Kafuku's grace-fulfilling moment, it had a greater ability to move me personally. And you may think I'm just spitting pretentiousness from my butt, that I'm making up these thematic elements. but in reality, this throughline existed in Hamaguchi and co-writer Takamasa Oe's framework. Using Waiting for Godot and Uncle Vanya, Hamaguchi concedes to this in an interview with Santa Barbara International Film Festival. But instead of suddenly finding God from the machine at the end, we become more aware that it was the machine itself that has saved Misaki and Kafuku. This concept of Deus Ex Machina now turned to Deus Est Machina. There are so many more additions to the creation of this video. I wish I was more better at writing and I could weave them all together. Some things I love include the directive style of Hamaguchi and Kafuku through rehearsing the text with very precise, very perfect timing without emotions until the text seeps into the character. When done correctly, by the time the camera rolls or the curtain lifts, the actors don't have any preconceived notions of how they should act or even feel. But once play begins, they can respond and react to the body language of their colleagues and get an even richer performance. Adding the multilingual aspect obviously presents challenges, but after so much rehearsing, the actors have internalized the text and can now freely act. That's what Kafuku, and by extension Hamaguchi, wants. In addition, just having the main vehicle be a foreign left-hand driven car just adds to the cultural richness of Japan. Foreign cars are held in a separate class in Japan. Much like JDM or KDM cars here in the States, left-hand driven vehicles aren't uncommon among Japanese citizens looking for an added level of class. Even among storytellers, like the actor-director of the movie, this is found true. The creator behind Studio Ghibli, Hayao Miyazaki's favorite car was a Citroën 2CV, which he would drive to work every day. And the text the movie is based on came from a writer whose enthusiasm for cars and the road is apparent through a collection of appearances among his works. Is this a supreme example of correct cinematic alignment? Maybe not in the highest degree, but it does shift the ideals behind this channel. Sometimes the heart wants what it wants. Kafuku wanted a Saab 900 Turbo. It only took him a few decades to discover its worth. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one.